Who is Mother Goose? Someone reached out to me and she shows me this picture right here. I used to have this book growing up as a child, so right away I recognized this. And she said, okay, please just give me your opinion on this. Is this a witch or am I going crazy? I didn't know who else to ask that would understand where I'm coming from. I have never liked this book. My in-laws gave it to us, so for that reason I have not sent it to the Goodwill. I have never read it to my kids, and every time I'm clearing things out, I think, I want to get rid of this. So it's laying on the floor today, and even though I've had this book for 8 years, I've never seen it in this light. I looked at it and all I saw was a witch, really clearly. My husband thinks I'm crazy and that I'm mixing it up with the time period dress. I would love your opinion, thanks. Okay, you know, it's funny because, like I said, I used to have this book growing up, and right away when I looked at it, I could see where she was coming from. I could see what she was talking about. So I decided to do a little bit of digging. Now, I had just been pondering chants and rhymes because it was connected to those songs that I was talking about that I felt I needed to dig a little deeper on. And then a friend reaches out to me and shares this with me. So I start thinking, okay, this is something that is geared towards children. It's geared towards children, and these are catchy rhymes that get stuck in your head that you sing over and over and over, and tradition has it that we have fond memories of these rhymes, and so we pass them on to our children and they pass them on to their children. What are these rhymes really about, and who wrote them? Who is Mother Goose? And why is she often portrayed as a witch? And so I just started thinking about this. It reminded me of the Halloween video, how we talked about everything being geared towards the children and how that's the tactic of the adversary. He goes after the children. And when you have these traditions ingrained in you as a young child, it's a lot more difficult to grow out of them later on. And you want to pass them down to your children, and you create these memories and traditions. So again, I decided to dig a little deeper, and here's what I found. So before we get into the history of Mother Goose and who she is, let's talk about the background of some of these popular nursery rhyme classics, starting with Peter Pumpkin Eater. Now, the first thing that should raise a red flag is where I got this information. It's from a website called New World Witchery, which is all about promoting and supporting American traditional witchcraft. Now, the article that I'm referencing actually says, today we look at a toy chest full of children's nursery rhymes, playground games, and riddles. We talk about how these sing-song verses can sometimes hide bits and pieces of valuable witch lore, as well as how they can be incorporated into one's practice. Now here's what they say about Peter Pumpkin Eater, who had a wife and couldn't keep her. He put her in a pumpkin shell, and there he kept her very well. This is a popular classic that many of us as children learned to play on the piano. So they write in this article, this rhyme fits in very well at New World Witchery because it originates in North America. While many nursery rhymes came from the UK, the mention of the pumpkin in this one tells of its roots. Pumpkins are a New World fruit, unknown in Europe prior to the colonial era. But what's it all about? Well, if a man has a wife he can't keep, it means that she is being generally unfaithful to him and turning him into a cuckold. My take on this particular rhyme is that our good fellow Peter knows of his wife's infidelity and decides to put a stop to it. He does this by putting something of hers, likely something very intimate like used underclothes, into a pumpkin shell, which, as it rots, prevents her from being able to dally with other men. This sort of spell is common enough in hoodoo and is generally referred to as binding someone's nature, so they cannot sexually perform with another partner. Now, other sources that I referenced spoke of Peter being a murderer. He kills his wife, chops her up, and puts her body in a pumpkin shell, and there he keeps her very well so that she is never unfaithful again. So it may also have a morbid meaning. This all just begs the question, why is this being read to children? Alright, now let's talk about the nursery rhyme of the crooked man who walks a crooked mile, or the crooked path, which I can tell you definitely is not the covenant path, probably the complete opposite. Notice in this picture, his black cat is on a tombstone. Now the author of this same article says, the repetition of the word crooked seems to be almost a mantra or a chant for moving into another state of mind. I think that the crooked mile could well be the crooked path of witchcraft. The crooked stile is likely the gateway between worlds. So my best use of this charm is to act as a road opener between the mundane world and the world of spirits. There are also plenty of stories about paying a tithe to hell before crossing over, and it's usually something nominal, or at least something that seems nominal at the time. So a sixpence would fit the bill. Now what about the childhood rhyme, The London Bridge is Falling Down? Well, I Wikipedia'd it, and there are many different theories. One thing that stood out was the child sacrifice theory. Yep, you heard that right. This theory is that the song refers to the burying, perhaps alive, of children in the foundations of the bridge. This was based on the idea that a bridge would collapse unless the body of a human sacrifice was buried in its foundations, and that the watchman is actually a human sacrifice who will then watch over the bridge. And if that isn't morbid enough, let's talk about the popular children's song Ring Around the Rosies, which is also a nursery rhyme. Now it says here, the invariable sneezing and falling down in modern English versions have given would-be origin finders the opportunity to say that the rhyme dates back to the Great Plague, or the Black Plague. A rosy rash, they allege, was a symptom of the plague, and posies of herbs were carried as protection and to ward off the smell of the disease. Sneezing or coughing was a final fatal symptom, and all fall down was exactly what happened. The ashes, ashes in colonial versions of the rhyme is claimed to refer to the cremation of the bodies. Now I had heard this before, and it crosses my mind every time I hear children singing it. Do they really know what it is they're singing? And if they did, would they continue to sing it? Now, let's dig into Mother Goose. Artwork of Mother Goose, dating back to the 18th century, depicts her with a broomstick, a pointed hat, buckled shoes, and a dark cloak, flying on a goose across the sky. Sometimes she is depicted as a gentle-looking elderly woman, but most often she is featured as a haggardly-looking witch with a long pointy nose, sometimes with gray or green-colored skin and long, bony fingers, always hovering over the children or gathering around them, telling them stories and chanting rhymes. I was reminded of what I mentioned at the earlier part of the video about ancient folklore depicting an angry mother goddess flying across the sky. Her broomstick represented the doomsday comet that caused destruction on the earth, much like what we read about in folklore with witches wearing pointy hats, flying on broomsticks, targeting children, and lashing out their anger through casting spells. Here's an illustration from a nursery rhyme from a vintage Mother Goose book, Black Cats and Witches. Here she is on a couple of different covers of turn-of-the-century Mother Goose books, depicted as an angry witch with a sinister smile. Who would want to read these stories to their children? This would give them nightmares. And something odd about the cover on the right, notice her foot is pointed backwards. Sometimes Mother Goose is even depicted as dusting the cobwebs out of the sky with her broom. Similar to the nursery rhyme of the old woman tossed up in the basket, 19 times as high as the moon. Where she was going, I couldn't but ask it, for in her hand she carried a broom. And then there was the old woman and her cat, who rode on a broom, another nursery rhyme that is often forgotten. So what is this fascination with Mother Goose nursery rhymes depicting so many old women? Often these rhymes start out with, "There was an old woman," such as there was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children she didn't know what to do. So she whipped them and sent them to bed. And in this original 1797 version, it speaks of the old woman going out to purchase coffins for her children. When she comes back, she finds them laughing, sending the message that if you have unruly children and you can't afford to take care of them, well, you just go out and buy them coffins. And then there's poor old Mother Hubbard, who goes to her cupboard and the cupboards are bare. In this vintage drawing, Mother Hubbard looks like a witch. She has extremely large masculine hands and hair on her chin. So, just who is Mother Goose? Well, it depends on who you ask. If you Google it, you're going to find lots of different theories, and there doesn't seem to be any clear, concrete evidence. However, there was a story in 1875 called Mother Goose and Her Son Jack. The story is very similar to Jack and the Beanstalk and the Goose That Laid the Golden Egg. Jack and his mother are poor. He goes into town and buys a goose, falls in love with a beautiful lady. The goose happens to lay golden eggs. He becomes wealthy, and they all live happily ever after. And Mother Goose flies away on her gander. But that still doesn't explain why Mother Goose was more often depicted as a sinister, evil witch. But some speculate that it has to do with a connection to an old Germanic goddess named Holda. Now, because my husband is German, I'm very familiar with Holda and her nursery rhymes. Holda was deeply connected to children. She instructed them, brought gifts to them at winter solstice, took unbaptized babies back into her womb, and even kept unborn infants in her underground water reservoirs, ready for delivery to their human mothers when the time was right. And there are many similarities between Mother Goose and Holda, one of them being that they both were drawn with large bird beak noses. Some believe that this has to do with ancient roots of Holda being a bird goddess. She was eventually also shown as shaking feathers out of a pillow. That's part of her story. And the feathers represented snow. It had to do with winter solstice. She would fly through the air on birds, or fly in a wagon or a sled pulled by birds. After the fall of Rome, Holda merged with the goddess Aphrodite. And still to this day, Germany pays homage to Frau Holle or Holda in many of their traditions. So, Mother Goose and Holda were both associated with flying on birds and loving children. But there came a time when the church felt that Holda was no longer a good influence on young women. She was no longer instructing them, but rather corrupting them. So, throughout the centuries, the church began to demonize her. This could explain why she was portrayed as an evil witch. The church was trying to help steer the youth away from these pagan deities. So, instead of showing her flying on a bird, she now flew on a broom, and her bird beak nose became large and hideous. And after the church demonized her, it became deadly for Europeans to associate themselves in any way with Holda. Most stopped teaching their children about her, and it's believed that some still secretly followed her under a new name to protect themselves, and that new name was Mother Goose. So, could Mother Goose actually be a pagan deity? With it so rooted in our blood and in our culture and in our traditions, it's no wonders that we have such a fascination and fixation with witches. And according to this article that I have linked down below, Mother Goose sort of came out of the closet at the same time the European witch craze began to taper off. By 1630, the worst of the witch trials were over, and only 4 years before that, in 1626, the term Mother Goose made its first appearance in print. In fact, in 1806, Mother Goose appeared as a bona fide witch in the British play Harlequin and Mother Goose, in which Mother Goose not only raises a storm, but also raises a woman from the dead. And by the 1880s, American artists felt safe showing Mother Goose as a magic woman, akin to the goddess Holda and Aphrodite. To most, she was a child-loving goddess, but to others, she was a sinister monster. This would explain the images as the Halloween witch. Well, since 1930, Mother Goose has rarely been depicted as an evil-looking woman. Sometimes she's even shown as a beautiful, majestic, and glorious woman, a protector of children. Alright, so I'm getting to my point with this here in a minute, but I want to say when I was pondering on Mother Goose, the first thing that came to mind was Mother Gothel. Now, Mother Gothel is featured in the fairy tale Rapunzel by the Brothers Grimm. Now, in the fairy tale, she's depicted as a typical witch-like character. But later on, Disney changed this to adapt better to their film. Nevertheless, she is an evil woman who seeks immortality and powers through Rapunzel's hair. And in German, the word Gothel means godmother, which reminds me of mother goddess or mother god. Now the word Gothel reminds me of the word Gothic or Goth, which according to these definitions is a person who is a part of a subculture that favors a darker style of music and a morbid aesthetic, someone who dresses in black shirts and black pants, and also defined as a barbarian. Clearly, this word is associated with darkness. Now, as I pondered on the word Mother Gothel and Mother Goose, well, Mother Goddess came to my mind, and this brought me back to the beginning of this video message when I was watching that documentary about the Saturn theory and about this angry Mother Goddess who came across the sky on the doomsday comet, which created much destruction on the earth. I began to think about paganism and Wiccans and how they worship these Mother Goddess deities. Then what came to mind is Mother Gaia, also known as Mother Earth. Now, according to Greek mythology, Gaia is the primal Mother Earth goddess. She is the mother of all life. Kind of sounds like Eve, doesn't it? Now, she is supposedly the immediate parent of Uranus, the sky, and she bore the Titans, or the Olympian gods, the giants of the earth. She has definite similarities to the German deity Holda, as she is related to life. Now, as these deities have become such a part of paganism and the practice of Wicca and the New Age, it's crazy to see how much they have become immersed into our everyday culture and tradition. Now, going back to the Saturn theory and that ancient lineup of those planets, there was this formation called the triform goddess sign. Well, the triple goddess is in reference to maiden, mother, and crone, which is represented by the waxing, full, and waning moons. And again, Mother Goose and witches are always depicted as flying across the moon. So what exactly is this doomsday theory that's behind this Mother Goddess? Well, this theory proposes that around the 15th century BC, the planet Venus was ejected from Jupiter as a comet or a comet-like object and subsequently passed near Earth. So according to this theory, when this happened, it changed the Earth's orbit, and it caused all kinds of catastrophes that are mentioned all throughout different histories and mythologies and religious traditions from human civilizations all over the world. So supposedly 52 years later, it again made a close approach, and it stopped the Earth's rotation for a while and caused even more catastrophes. And finally, according to this theory, around the 8th and 7th centuries BC, Mars made a close approach to the Earth, and supposedly this incident caused a whole new round of disturbances and disasters all over the Earth. After that, the current celestial order was established, and the courses of the planets stabilized over the centuries, and supposedly Venus gradually became a normal planet. Now, my whole point in sharing this theory in this video is to illustrate the point that these ancient civilizations believed that this planet Venus was a mother goddess, and that when she was angry, and it caused disturbances all over the earth, which is why they depict her as an old haggard witch. She's got flames shooting out of her. Sometimes she's depicted as a dragon, a fire-breathing dragon in the sky. And she controlled the weather and the elements, hence all of the natural disasters that they were experiencing. And what about the long hair and broomstick? The descriptions of this doomsday comet were depicted as these feathery type streams of light. So they would depict him with feathers, flames, and also brooms, different types of brooms. And whenever people saw these drawings or depictions, it reminded them of the angry goddess or the doomsday comet. And the documentary made references to witches and why witches are depicted as riding on broomsticks or flying on a broomstick across the full moon or across the moon, across the sky, because the broom was a symbol of this doomsday comet and the witch was a symbol of the angry goddess. Now, this theory is a part of another theory called the Saturn theory, or Saturn configuration, which is the idea based on mythology that the Earth was once in closer proximity or even a satellite of the planet Saturn, which appeared like a sun. Now, this theory speaks of a planetary alignment that I'm going to mention here in a minute, but this planetary alignment is believed to be what makes up the Eye of Ra. Now, did you know that the Eye of Ra represented the right eye, which symbolized the sun, and the Eye of Horus represented the moon and was depicted as the left eye, and eventually the Eye of Horus and the Eye of Ra were lumped under one name, the All-Seeing Eye. Now, in this video documentary, it speaks of Venus being the mother goddess, and this collinear model of the polar configuration describes the planets Saturn, Venus, and Mars in this Earth system. And this belief or this theory is shared by several different researchers. It's just really interesting. And this theory describes the way that these planets turned on their axis. It says that Earth, Mars, and Saturn rotated on a common axis extending out or down from Jupiter, and it describes Jupiter as being its relative. In fact, some researchers even have suggested that Venus is the offspring of Jupiter and the Sun. Now, eventually this all played into ancient mythology, so I guess understanding this theory sort of helped make sense of the way ancient legends and folklore and mythology sort of evolved. So as these planets would rotate and spin, if you were standing on the Earth, this is what you would see. As they would turn and rotate, the lighting would form a crescent shape, and it would change directions, so it would eventually go all the way around. So you'd have a crescent moon or a crescent moon shape in each direction. This was also called a sun wheel. Now, this symbol of the crescent moon and star eventually became the symbol of Islam, and today you'll see it displayed on many different flags throughout the Middle East. What's interesting is on their flags, the crescent moon shape is shown in different directions, and so they talked about in this documentary about how that might have appeared at that point on the Earth, wherever you were standing at a different location on the Earth, at a different time of year, you would have seen that crescent moon shape, that lighting, you would have seen it in a different direction. So in The Secret History of the Witches by Max Dashu, he talks about the old goddess of the pagans, how she was someone that the people prayed to for their well-being, for their abundance, protection, and healing. They invoked her in birth and death. They said that this old goddess rode the winds, causing rain and snow and hail on the earth, and that she revealed omens of weather and deaths as other momentous things to come. And here's a list of all the different names she went by in these different regions of the world. In Germany, this mother goddess, Frau Holle, or Holda, is who became known as Mother Goose, or the Goose Mother, because when she would make it snow, the people would say, "The old woman is feathering her geese." You know, these are feathers falling from the sky. This, of course, is a fairy tale written by the brothers Grimm. They talk about an old, wise woman living in a mountain forest with her flock of geese. And though she called out cheerful greetings, some people mistrusted her. Fathers warned their sons to watch out for the old woman. She's a sly one and a witch. Frau Holle, also known as Mother Goose, was described as a witch goddess in the 9th century Corrector Retardi. She was said to head a wild cavalcade of spirits, witches, and the dead, especially in the dark of the year. Yes, this mother goddess that has been worshipped all throughout the centuries in so many different civilizations, in traditions, religions, and history. She has morphed into who we call Mother Goose. Now, she's also the inspiration for modern day movies, media, and books. The depiction that you see as what a witch would look like originates from this Mother Goose. And it's important to know that she is still worshipped today. You can find her name, as you see right here, on magic, occult, and witchcraft websites all over the world, in which you can read about what offerings to give her when you're worshiping her. She's attached to sacred plants, sacred animals, and even a constellation. So having shared all of this, as we come to the conclusion of this video, you may want to think twice the next time you pull out a Mother Goose book to read your children nursery rhymes, or, as modern day witches would call them, spells.